Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. As we're waiting for people to come in, if you could just perhaps check the name that's displayed on your tile, and perhaps put where you're from, which college, which provider you're from, which school you're from in there. That will give us an idea of who we're talking to, and also maybe the name that you wish to be referred to. Hi, Alona. Nice to see Kirklees here. Okay, let's get started then with you can see that today our focus is going to be on tracking, QA, systems. That's the sort of focus. You're about halfway through your first delivery year, so it's a good opportunity to then think about how we've gone with recording progress and achievement within transition programs. We've got Steve Watterson, who you'll know, to give a brief overview of the framework for delivery and the national technical outcomes, just very briefly. We may have a quick word from the DFE, but I've got some sort of technical issues at the minute, so that may happen later. And then we have a little breakout session to sort of share some ideas and feedback on what we're doing around tracking and quality assurance. Okay, if you're not currently teaching, Sarah, no problem. There'll be things to contribute, I'm sure, and you'll absolutely will pick a lot up.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide, please. And the one after that. Thank you. So, if we can just keep video and audio off while when we're just in the main room for now and people are speaking. If you've got questions, put them in the chat. We'll use the chat function for dropping links to things as well. When we come to the breakout sessions, you can put your cameras and audio on, obviously. And if you've got access to a second device, maybe your mobile phone, or you've got another window on your laptop or on your PC, make that accessible, because we'll be using that a little bit later. Okay, thank you. So next slide, what to expect, and again the next one, please. So we're going to be just looking at where you're at now, currently with the framework for delivery, and how you're actually finding that in practice when you planned against it last year very successfully. But let's see how that's actually landed on the ground. And as I said previously, we're looking at the monitoring of national technical outcomes and the tracking of the framework delivery. How are you doing that? What are your recommendations? What are your top tips? What are you not going to do next year, for example? Next slide, please. And the plan is to be finished by 4 o'clock. Yes, you'll get the slides. We'll send them all out afterwards. Abby will send them out afterwards. So we finished by 4:30. We've got to do about 15 minutes for our breakout session and 10 minutes of feedback, and then we'll just flag up some things that are coming up in the next sort of month or so. Okay, next slide, please. Well, currently Frank's not here, and Joseph from the department is just having these audio problems. So if you pretend that I'm from the DFE for a second, welcome everybody. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this webinar, etc. But the one thing will remind you of is the deadline for the Employer Support Fund is Friday. You should have received all that information ahead of time already and been sent some things out. So make sure you get your applications in there, please. Okay, that's my DFE hat off, and I shall hand you over now to Steve Watterson, who's the manager of the T-level programs, provider readiness, and he'll give you a little overview on the framework for delivering national technical outcomes.
Thanks, Paul. If I can have the next slide, please, Abby. And then the next one. Okay, so if people could first of all go to www.menti.com and use the code 2923170 or scan the QR code. Can I just, Abby, can I just share my screen, please? Bear with me a second. Okay, for some reason the sharing window has vanished, so I'll do it. I'll run Menti myself, and I'll do that. So on your device, you should have your the option to join. So it's www.menti.com. Use the code 2923170. First question was just to ask you to put in your provider name. So we've got some people putting them in now. So we've got South Gloucestershire and Stroud College, we've got SNB College Group, we've got Southport College. So we'll just give people just a minute or two just to try to get into that. So we've got Southend City College, Birmingham. Well, we've got another Southend City College, Birmingham. Kirklees, yeah, I think Paul already said that he knew Kirklees was here. So so welcome everybody. Heart of Worcester College, New College Swindon. Oh, I was talking to Jason earlier, New College Swindon, whoever's from New College Swindon. I was talking to Jason a little bit earlier. Darlington College. Okay, so we've got a fair selection of colleges there. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So if you could you could answer this question. So what are the positive aspects of the new framework for delivery? So the transition programme that started in September 22. So I have guidance and uniformity, which is useful. Flexibility, develop skills which are suitable for future use. Time to build and scaffold T-level ready students. Yeah, so that's you know, a big thing as part of the transition programme, that given time to develop the students to become T-level ready. Prepare for T-level. Another one coming up there. So we've got skills which are more suitable for future use. So future use potentially being for the T-level. We've got preparing for T-level, good preparation for T-level, develop skills. There's a clear commonality there in terms of developing the students in preparation for their for moving on to the T-level. Okay, so these are the positive aspects of the framework for delivery. Next question. Okay, and this is my final question before I go through my into my slides. What are the challenges being faced by the new framework for delivery? Lack of structure. That's interesting. Maybe pick that up when you go to the breakout room in terms of a lack of structure. Quality assuring NTO. You've come to the right place, hopefully. Work-based placements. No criteria. Like reassuring, Leo, here we've got the resources. No resources. So resources for the transition programme. Tracking. Okay, so we've got one in sort of like a strategic position as to where the transition programme is. We've got one work placement and the numbers on the course. Challenges and flexibility, monitoring behaviours, no qualification attached. Okay, so there's some things there that we can potentially pick up on. No idea of a project for the transition program. You know, whoever put that one down, have a look at the technical focus groups that will come up later, because there should be some information there to help you with our project. So thank you very much for you putting that into there, and I'm going to stop my sharing and come back. And Abby, I wonder if you could put me into the put me back into my slides. There we go. So the framework for delivery. So what I was going to present today is just a brief overview of the framework for delivery and the national technical outcomes. So as you will be aware, as from September 2022, the framework for delivery was introduced by the DFE. The information for this framework for delivery, AOC and the DFE worked together and gathered evidence from providers in the first year of delivery, based on wider evidence on good practice from a number of different providers, and work with providers, employers, educational specialists to develop the revised national programme. The outcome of this work and this evidence gathering was the new framework for delivery, and included in the new framework for delivery then was the national technical outcomes, which are for each of the routes. If I can have the next slide, please, Abby. So the national technical outcomes have been designed with a line of sight to the T-level, in conjunction with providers, in conjunction with employers, and obviously with T-level in mind. And they cover the technical aspects that students should expect to cover in greater depth if they're progressing to the T-level. I think the good thing about the framework for delivery is that flexibility is retained on how providers meet the national technical outcomes. The framework for delivery covers a wider holistic approach to the T-level transition programme, including the technical aspects, but more widely the 5 other components too. So the 5 other components being the diagnostic component, English and maths, experience of the workplace, pastoral support, and there was one other, and it's just jumped out of my head. Alongside the technical component, the technical components. So you will have designed your programme to cover all these aspects, and to make this a holistic programme of delivery. If I can have the next slide, please, Abby. So the way that we've seen providers working on this is approaches are varied, and providers will say, right, so are we going to use a qualification? Are we not going to use a qualification? How much time do we allocate to the different components? And what entry requirements are we going to set for the courses? And we have some providers who are saying, do they do both English and maths? Do we only do one English or maths? I think the one thing that's safe to say is that what we've seen is we've never seen 2 programs the same from different providers. So there's always a little difference between what the providers are doing. What we have seen is many providers are focusing on the delivery of a qualification, and they map the NTO coverage to the qualification and then fill in any gaps or blanks from the NTOs with extra content and or the route-based project. Now we see that happening quite a lot, and there's mapping exercises. We're doing this qualification. Here's the NTOs we can tick off, and here's the gaps. What I'd just like to suggest potentially is something slightly different and a just slight change of mindset here. And it may be something which you can take through to your discussion in the breakout room, really. But actually delivering the NTOs as separate NTOs, so that potentially through a series of mini projects based maybe around one of the national technical outcomes, that you deliver a teaching and learning episode to cover the national technical outcome, and then you track and monitor the development and the coverage of these through the project outcomes. And then at some stage then in the year, if you're including, then map the teaching and learning from the qualification and then map that against the assessment. So in actual fact, what that would potentially do is allow you to give your students time to develop the skills. So we said from the Menti from the start, what are the good things about the framework for delivery, about the developing skills? If we move into BTEC assessment within 2-3 weeks of them starting the course, wonder whether there's a better way to help to give them time to develop the skills before we actually focus on the assessment. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Abby. So in terms of how you deliver your program and in terms of how you structure it and so on, you will have some quality assurance. So your internal systems will inevitably, measure the standard in one of the transition programs and sort of measure is that equivalent to the standards across the other transition programs. Your internal systems will require staff to evidence the delivery and meeting of the national technical outcomes. You want to track and monitor skills development. You want to track progress on your work experience. You're going to be very, very shortly moving into breakout rooms, and there's going to be a chance to explain how you have achieved this or how you're planning to achieve this. But yeah, I think in terms of your breakout room, thinking about and sharing your experiences on how you're tracking and monitoring the delivery of the national technical outcomes is something probably to sort of focus on there. I think that's it, Abby, from me. Yeah, okay, so I'll pass back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Steve. There was a question that just popped into the chat from Sally Blake, and it was around your use of the term qualification. Sally's saying that this year's program doesn't give the learner a qualification, does it?
It can and it can't. It's that's the flexibility of the framework for delivery. So we're seeing lots of providers putting qualification into the technical component. So it may be, I think what we are seeing is providers doing a smaller qualification than traditionally level 2 students would do. So maybe moving away from a 4 GCSE equivalent BTEC or CTEC into maybe a 2 GCSE equivalent. The national technical outcomes were designed to be delivered in around about 120 to 150 guided learning hours. So it's looking at, if you're doing that with a qualification, it's looking at a qualification which is that kind of size and not maybe up to 360 hours as potentially traditional level 2 study programs were.
Yeah, maybe something we can tease out in the breakout rooms. So we'll go to those now. We needed to make sure that Steve didn't get locked in to Mansion House at 4 o'clock today, and he's just about managed that, Steve. So sadly, we'll have you back again tomorrow and all that kind of thing. So you'll be sent into breakout rooms automatically. If you'll have an advisor in that breakout room, if the advisor, you can summarize the discussion and perhaps focus on one or choose somebody from your group to focus on one key thing that you discuss. So if the advisor will summarize a discussion and then one of the other participants will talk about one thing in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's go to the breakout sessions. I think we're all coming back. We had 4 groups to feedback. Hey, Ibrahim, would you start with your group, please?
Yeah, so most of our discussions revolved around the quality assurance side of things. We had a very good example given by Julie in terms of sort of setting their own benchmarks. So normally where you've got the pass, merit, distinction grades, what they've done is they've got their own sort of benchmarks. So they've got the bronze, silver, gold sort of levels of achievements that you can get. And this is what the students are sort of working towards, and they're all color coded as well. So that was a really good example. We had another provider that said most of their sort of IQA is done externally, and that sort of seems to work a lot better for them. So I think sometimes with IQA, it just depends on what each provider and how it works best for them, really. But I don't know if you want to sort of chip in a little bit, Julie, in terms of the benchmarks that you were talking about?
It was actually Iona I think it's Iona that mentioned it. I didn't mention the colours. So thank you anyway.
Yeah, you got the credit for it. I can't remember who talked about the different bronze, silver, gold approach. Was it Ilona?
Yes, it was me.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to just sort of reinforce that example.
It's what I do when what I do for qualifications that do not have pass merit distinction. I specify bronze, silver, gold to distinguish the effort and the detail put in by different learners. And then for when Ofsted is coming and we're looking at how else can this learner do the next step. So you can actually have a learner starting at bronze in September. And by the end of the year, hopefully their work is at gold level, and we'll explain to them how they need to further develop their skills, whether it's in research, referencing, whatever's needed.
Yeah, I think that's quite important in terms of measuring value added from where the student's starting and towards the end of the journey. So that's quite a good measuring indicator there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ibrahim. That's great. Nick, would you like to feed back from your group, please?
We kind of focused on how the national technical outcomes are kind of mapped against the technical qualification that's being used. There were some challenges. So in the Manchester College, they mapped against the level 2 transition diploma that has been developed, and which has embedded English and maths. And also this year, they've added a science qualification, GCSE biology, I think, to support students' progress to the T level. They need to kind of focus a bit more on digital skills for the next transition program next year. They've taken on a lot of students, actually. They've got 100 students on their transition program, and that's created quite a few challenges in terms of securing work placements. And there was a query about, they had some feedback from Ofsted about whether they should use virtual experiences, kind of taster days, to supplement work experience activities. There have been some concerns about progression as well, because sometimes students are kind of exiting the transition program, excuse me, with a license to practice. So at Filton College, the qualification they did gave the students a license to practice at level 2. And some of the feedback from the students was that they wanted to do a program perhaps that didn't include the heavy workload of exams that is on a T level. And I think the consensus between the two colleges that were in my group was just looking at the entry requirements for a transition program to support the progress to level 3. So we discussed whether there could be an element of level 3 in the transition program to support that. But as a result, they felt that students really needed to start the transition program with grade 4s in maths and English, because in a few cases, they've given students the option who probably got the kind of GCSE grades that you would perhaps take for a BTEC, but not quite strong enough for a T level. And they've offered the opportunity for those students to do a transition program just to give them the extra year to progress. I don't know if my colleagues in the room wanted to add anything. Rachel and...
Yeah, for us, this year we haven't done a level 2 qualification that gives learners the license to practice at level 2, but our employers have told us that through our employer boards that they want our learners to have a license to practice. So next year we'll be delivering the TLTP alongside the level 2 diploma, and that's why I fear we're going to lose students who transitioning from the level 2 up to the T level, because they're going to go straight into employment.
We're hearing a lot of this, actually, especially in care sector, because there's so many vacancies that students are either getting poached into employment or into apprenticeships. I guess all you can do there is give some good careers advice to that individual, and then they make that decision. An organisation I was speaking to this week kind of negotiate with their employers that maybe if they want to offer somebody a perhaps they could offer them a part-time job for a bit until they finish the course, and then offer them the full-time job. So there's perhaps some negotiation that could be done with employers to sort of level that out a little bit.
I think the T level is just too full on to work part-time. I've got one learner who is working part-time at the moment, trying to do 2 days per week, and she's just really, really struggling. And I just think that the content of a T level is just too much to hold down that part-time job as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks. Okay, next group, Lauren, please.
So our group so David also mentioned, similar to Ibrahim's group, that they do a performance review during the TLTP, so the bronze, silver and gold. We spoke about small projects as opposed to large qualifications. Sally explained how she's not doing a qualification at the moment and they've not planned to, and sort of the reasons behind that, mainly so they can sort of spend more time on the skills and that needed for the student, as opposed to doing a qualification then sort of takes that away potentially from them later on down the line. Sarah also said about how they are doing the Working Healthcare Centre qualification. 1 day a week they do sort of a practical day, another day of the week they do sort of a coursework day, and sort of the benefits of that and how that's sort of keeping motivation, things like this. And then using that qualification, they map that against the NTOs to make sure that everything's sort of being met, things like that. I didn't know if it's anyone from our group wanted to make a comment or to add anything. We also sort of mainly spoke about sort of GCSE criteria and things like that.
Yeah, we talked about different pathways, perhaps determining the entry requirements around maths and English and science, didn't we?
Yep.
And you know, depending on the pathway, that would determine whether or not the entry requirements would link to a grade 4 or a grade 3.
Great, thank you. And finally then, Becky's group, please.
Yeah, so we spoke about an array of things really, and there was sort of a mixed room in terms of sort of experience and approaches, but sort of one of the pertinent things that I think came out of it was the sort of tracking and monitoring of the KSBs and the NTOs. So a couple of providers use sort of a centralized mark books, Pro Solutions, because they find it easy to adapt and to link to the NTOs as well. There is exploration. So there's one provider that was in the room that is doing a non-qual approach, and that's Andrea, but I won't steal her thunder because I've asked her to talk in a minute. But then there was sort of exploration with others in the room about doing a non-qual approach next year. And not necessarily because the qualification approach hadn't worked well, just because you're then not beholden to external verification, registration costs, exam costs, etc. So now that sort of the first year of delivery is coming to an end, the mindset has sort of changed. So it's not so much about making sure that the students have that tangible qualification to go away with, it's about preparing them effectively. So based around sort of building those positive professional and personal behaviours that they're going to need for the workplace, for progression to T-level, etc. And also Andrea was talking about maybe exploring implementing sort of a new matrix that tracks the knowledge, skills and behaviours from the initial diagnostic period to the end of the academic year, just to add a sort of self-assessment and growth mindset element to the course as well. So on that note, I will hand over to Andrea. Sorry, I called her Andrea. Ashley, sorry. Oh God, how rude of me. But hand over to Ashley, sorry, just to talk about their approach at Darlington College this year.
That's okay, thanks.
Sorry.
That's all right, don't we? So yeah, we decided to go for the non-qualification approach, just so that we had the flexibility really to really focus on what our learners need. So we've spent a lot of time in the beginning really looking at behaviours required for placement and also for progression, and looking at maths and English needs, looking at general study skills. So what I've put together is I use the NTOs to kind of put together a number system for the knowledge, skills and behaviours that I could then use to track against mini projects. So I put together 10 mini projects that cover the NTOs and or knowledge, skills and behaviours as we've numbered them. And I think it's just allowed us to really focus in more individually about what the students need. And as Becky mentioned, the only thing I think I'm missing is I feel like I need something more in the beginning for the diagnostic assessment. So I'm looking at just doing something at week 5 that assesses all of those needs, and then kind of putting together a matrix system that looks at their level of English skill, their level of maths skill, their behaviours in a classroom, and also kind of their current knowledge and their general progress, and then track that kind of every half term, so that we can show how far they've come.
That's really interesting, Ashley. I have a provider that uses a project as part of the diagnostic process.
Yeah.
That could be an interesting way, and you can do that across all the different, across technical areas as well. So you've got one overarching thing and different technical areas feeding in different ways, but still assessing those wider skills. Brilliant. Sounds like there's some very purposeful discussions going on. If there's anything that you need to pick up in more detail, you can either email us at our transition program support email, or just talk directly to your advisor. Hopefully you all know who your advisor is. Right. Moving on then, could we have the presentation back up, and let's have some dates for the diary just to check, let you know what's going on. So happening this week, this very week, in fact, something's happening right now as well. Technical focus groups online. So these are kind of your sort of curriculum staff more so than any overarching leads. We've got five left before half term, and these are route specific, looking at very much the things we're talking about now. How you mapping an existing qualification against the NTOs, thinking about ways of running projects and what might be included there. How can you mop up any things that are missing with qualifications? What are you going to do with a non-qual approach? So recommend going to any of those. With engineering and manufacturing on the 31st, next Friday, there's quite low on numbers at the minute. So if you've got any engineering and manufacturing provision going, and some staff that would welcome going there, let's do sign up for that. Your advisor will have sent out links to transition program lead for where these all are. And then after Easter, we'll get back in touch with you with other events that we've coming up in the summer term. Okay. Unless anybody has any pressing questions, I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon. I think it's been really interesting. I think that the first year of delivery does expose what's not quite working, but also what you are doing well. So I'm sure that everyone's got some, no one's launched a program that's absolutely perfect. So there's always some things to think about and to tweak. You've still got some time, for the rest of the term if you want to make some kind of mid-program changes in terms of your monitoring too. But again, use your advisor, use the support we have here. We can always put you in contact with other providers. So again, thank you very much. Last thing is that if you just got a little evaluation of today, please. I think Abby's going to launch the poll here. It's very short, take you 2 minutes, and once you've done that, you're free to get on with the rest of your afternoons. And have a nice Easter when you get there. Have a good Easter break. I'm sure you all deserve one very thoroughly. You can just launch the poll then. Abby, please.